the word. And that is not only as objects or individuals you are researching, but also recognized and realized in research practices as agents and self-reflecting centers of intention and consciousness of persons with agency. And here I'm quoting Morck. In that way, when we recruit them, we usually say either participants, co-researchers, but as you will hear today, Martin is very special because he also became a research apprentice in a way where we have co-authored several scientific articles, 2 in Danish and 1 in English. And he has also been part of inventing something we call the moment-movement ethnography. And we will also show some moments of how Martin works with that. He has been doing that for more than 4 years now. Yeah. And it is every time there's an important moment in his life, he takes his phone and then he talks in details of how it feels, what happened, who was present, how did it affect him. And in that way, I think only the first year we had maybe, I think it was 35 logs, and now I don't even have the number of logs, but about 200 now. 200 logs. So it's detailed descriptions about meaningful, significant moments in his life as he has been part of this process of leaving the gang environment and becoming something new, the transformation, identity transformation process.
In the beginning, it was because I wanted to use the empirical data in the transitional phase. And she gave me the theoretical framework for it. But when I had encountered these significant moments, I was to sit and write them down, to describe what happened in this detailed manner. But as you will see later on, some of them was highly conflictual situations where you would get all pumped with adrenaline trying to win out fights. So it was very difficult for me to try to sit down shaking from adrenaline and try to describe everything. So I had to find a new way to create the empirical data and get them cataloged, if you should call it that. So I did that with the recordings. But it also presented us with some new nuances, which normally doesn't get embedded in the writing process. It's like how you breathe. Is it deep in the stomach or is it high in the throat? You get accents that change, funnily enough.
Yeah. You can hear if you are have anger or what's, yeah.
Yes. So that's how I developed the method, from writing them down to recording them.
So you can say this methodology that it is still practice research, but it's also become something new by collaborating with Martin. And according to the critical psychology, it is important to investigate how each of us live, act, and for what reasons, under which conditions, and we have practical reasons for doing so. Yes. When doing this work, we have from article to article, we have found different frameworks and developed them further also. But one of the what can you say, concepts that we keep going back to is the process of interpellation, when we have to explore this process of becoming something new while and becoming less of a gang person. And here we are inspired by Morck reconceptualization of Althusser's notion of interpellation by relating, and Morck, he has related it to recognition and participation within communities. So our research is a community where we are doing something together, we are engaged in the things we do, we produce something over time. It has been different projects. And we also, when we talk about interpellation, it may both be suppressive processes, it might also be empowering processes, and sometimes both forces is at stake in the same situation. So it's also very conflictual processes which we are researching, and you will see that later when we get into some of the moments from this moment movement research. And we have a goal about doing research which are also humanizing the subjects and contributing to social justice. Yes. Now we will tell a little story of how did this happen? How did we meet? And I can ask you, how did it start?
A little bit of a background, so you get a context how we met. Back in 2013, after being involved in the same biker gang for 12 years, I decided it was the end for me. I didn't want to be part of it anymore. So I chose to leave the gangs, the biker gang, in the summer. And we had about 3 or 4 months where everything was calm and easy. And then the war began. And as all conflicts, they are very expensive. And at the end of 2013, after I've left the gang, and after I was fighting the same gang that I left, I was arrested for a bank robbery because we were getting lower funds and I wasn't deemed credit worthy at the bank for a loan. So I had to go in and get the money myself after closure. So I did. So I was incarcerated. And being that for the 3rd or 4th time, I was getting quite tired of it because this time I've left the gangs after 12 years and I thought my life was going to be different. But still I found myself being incarcerated and fighting a war. I had to bury one of my friends again. He was being killed by getting shot through the neck. And then on the screen I saw this text video.
Yeah. It is a TV only in writing, so it reports different news.
Yeah, you can see all teletext.
It's the teletext. It's all.
Yeah.
All right, okay then. So I saw that this researcher suggested that we took gang members and biker members and put them in school situations. And that
boarding schools,
and such.
high school.
And it made a lot of sense to me. I've always been a little bit interested in academia, not in the way that I'm doing it right now, but still. And the last thing I was interested in when I graduated from high school was psychology. And Line is a psychologist. So I wrote her a handwritten note for the institution where I was incarcerated. I was a mental institution. And actually Line totally ignored my letter. So when I got released, I wrote her an email instead. And then you invited me for an interview at the university. And that interview sparked everything that we have created since, actually. And it's funny to see how much can come from a single opening. But we'll see how much came of it, actually.
Yes. And in that way, at this time, I was doing follow-up interviews with different former gang members to try to interview them and find out what are the significant situations in their life and how does it move them in different directions. And I was also visiting when they were doing different activities. But meeting Martin, it actually changed a little because I asked one of my master thesis students who was very much into the embodied side of the exit process to do an interview with him about this. And you did the interviews and then you knocked on the door to my office, and I said, oh, I've been doing all these recordings and so on, and I really want to do a master's thesis. When I become a student at the university, I will do a master's thesis about exit processes, and I want to start now doing the data. So I gave you 3 books to read. One was doing collective biography by Bronwyn Davis and Gannon, and it's very feminist. The other one was Female Sexualization by Frida Haus, also feminist literature. And you actually read it?
But didn't know. So actually I thought that angle of psychology was the entire psychology department, but little did I know, ironically enough, right?
And then, you know, when you were staying in this moment, you also called me, I want to be sure, do I do it right, and so on. So I listened to this lot and said, okay, tell it in very detail and so on, and very quickly you just embodied the way of doing these very detailed, thick descriptions of the whole situation, how it is embodied, and how it affects you, what you think, how you act, who is part of the situation, how does it change over time. Yes, so from that spot on, you were also becoming much more than a co-researcher, you were also becoming a research apprentice. And this word, research apprentice, we had to invent for the situation, because I didn't have it before, and it was quite funny. You said that this word also was funny according to the
biker culture. You use the same word when you start at the lowest level. You got to work to full patch membership. So I was being funny enough. I was being back at a new situation where I got to start with the same title to work my way up from the bottom.
But at the same time, I was also very inspired by Team Dave and Etienne Wenger's work and situated learning. And here, the apprenticeship notion about going from legitimate peripheral participation, becoming more engaged, more active, involved, and a full participant was part of the key concepts within the theory. So in that way it matched very well. And what we found out, it was that we did this workshop together with Jim Dave, where actually he was not just a newcomer and I was the old timer. When we were trying to find out what are the limitations and the possibilities when you are in prisons, how is prisons very different. I was talking to some of my colleagues who had been doing research in prison, but I really quickly found out that you knew much more about prisons than some of us with PhDs and things, the others within the field, researching in the field. So in that way, you were the old timer in many ways, also to knowledge about the gang environment. But so there was, what can you say, distributed knowledge and ways of working which created a kind of mutuality also in our collaboration, where we both got very inspired and very engaged and thought this was something new. Then in the summer, we started to produce what we call the life conduct list.
That's the summer 2014, and at that time I've been in the national exit program for about 3 months. And how many of you know what the exit program is? All right. That's sort of the municipality's program to get bikers or gang members to leave the gangs. So that's like the state taking over and trying to exit them from the environments. And at that time I was living at the city where I'm at, where I was originally from. I was actually living in the old clubhouse because the municipality couldn't relocate me because of the high profile around me. So they couldn't find a municipality that would accept me. So I had to live there with my pregnant wife for about 10 months. And funnily enough, actually, one time when I was driving to give a speak at Aarhus University about the limitations when you try to leave the gangs, I was trying to be killed with a car bomb. So I had to handle that and then go to the university to talk about what obstacles you might face trying to leave the gangs.
And he didn't even mention it, that he had put out a bomb under his car that morning, same morning.
It was a tight schedule, so I had to get busy. But anyway, so trying to leave the gangs and being very limited when you can move out of the city where everybody around you is still gang members. You don't have the financial means to leave it because everything you had in finances was located in the biker gangs. You don't have an educational degree. You got a gap on your resume that's 14 years long, so I couldn't get a job anywhere. So I was being very limited and wasn't able to produce any positive change in my life. I was just being forced to be in a very passive position. So when I speak with Line, at some point I summed it up and I told her, that was after...
It was in June?
Yeah, it was after something else. I told her it was being irresponsible of me trying to be a part of her world, academia, when I couldn't even get out of the city where people was trying to kill me still. And what Line, she did, she listed up all the positive things that I had going on. But because I was in such a dark place, I couldn't see it myself. That became the first half of the document, all the positive things you got going on. At some other point, she sent me another list of all the obstacles I had in my life, and I had quite the opposite effect.
Yeah, the first list you put up on the wall in the corner beside your computer. So
I could always use it in order to gain small lights in a very dark place. So I put it up on the wall to always motivate me to keep going. And when Line printed made the one with all the obstacles in it, I can assure you I did not put that up on the wall. So, and that actually became the cornerstone in the method, trying to visualize and express and make them visible all the strength that people have. Because it seemed that no matter the obstacles, I kept finding solutions to go do stuff.
So we evolved it into a kind of social work approach where you take and write all these things and you do it from a first-person perspective. So you quote the former gang member instead of doing it from a therapeutic psychologist language in diagnosis or in trouble and so on. You quote small things they have said about everything, and with all the obstacles, you also put action possibilities and people of significance which can actually help you do a difference when you are ready to work with these obstacles. And it's also so that people don't feel completely alone and isolated, because sometimes when you are so stressed in that period, you can't work at all these problems. There's there, I think at one moment there was maybe 17 problems, but after a while there was 17 on the positive list. The research and things that were working in your life, because we took different bullets from the obstacle list and it became parts who were actually functioning in the life, positive parts of your life. And that methodology we made into a scientific paper in Danish, our life conduct list. We also made another article called From biker gang member to academic, and now we also made an English article about movement methodology. So this collaboration around research, it's important, I think, that it's not, and I'm not a mentor, I'm not, even though I am a psychologist, I'm not a therapist and so on. And we have reflected a little, what is the difference actually?
When you try to lead the gangs in Denmark, it's a part of the exit program that you get a mentor. But also when you're working with the municipalities, you try to match up with a mentor. Also when I'm working on an operative level myself, trying to exit people from the gangs, there is a lot of talk about finding the right mentor. But that has never been a part of Lena's and my relation, because I never saw her as a mentor in that regular way, where we're trying to find some common third activity, for instance training or boxing, gymnastics, whatever, as being building a common ground. But we had a shared love for research, and that got so much deeper because it has carried us throughout like 4 or 5 years now, and we keep doing research together and just keeps evolving what it is that we do.
And you still send me audio logs and so on, and every time you send me an audio log, I respond to it with my reflections and so on. So we have, even though there might be some time between, we are actually in the same room, we are communicating a lot.
Still, yeah. I had to get used to that in the beginning, I remember. When I was fresh out of the biker gangs and I started sending you logs, you would respond to every one of them and said, I hear you say this, that I guess you mean this, and it was being so different for me to hear someone actually responding to my feelings in that way, so I had to get used to it over time, but I did.
Yes. I think we will skip similarities to critical ethnographic criminology because we have this log we want to read for you, so you can get the sense of what is an audio log, what are the detailed descriptions, and it's also about masculinity, as I know Ross have studied so greatly, and we think it will be a good. It's called Splitting at the Street. It will be a good log to discuss also together.
So this is a recording I made after a situation in the city where I'm from, and it has been transcribed, so we used it in our research. But I'll read it to you. I don't know if you have it on the screen as well.
Yes, we do.
Just in case I choke on the words. So.
And this is our English article coming out very soon, but it's on page what?
It's page 10.
Page 10. Let's see.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Gotta go a little bit up.
I just said,
it's all right. Cool. All right, so we're gonna start.
Hvis du dobbeltklikker under 10-tallet, så kan du få dem til at skrive sammen.
Dobbelt?
Den er under der ved de 2 sider. Den er der. Den er der. Så er det ikke
Ja.
Ja, lige præcis.
Okay.
Og så kan vi se noget på skærmen.
Hold on. Thank you. So okay. So this is an audio recording. In this one, I'm still living in the city where I'm from, and I couldn't get out of the city. And I was forced to live in the midst of all the biker gang members I left behind. And I'm still, how many of you know what bad standing is? Alright, so.
Just like last week.
Oh yeah? Okay, well, let me refresh it then.
Yes.
Okay, so when you leave the biker gangs, or whatever gang you're in, you got 2 ways of getting out of it. The good standing or the bad standing, and they call it different labels, but it's the same, exit anywhere. You get out on good terms, you can call it whatever you want to call it, you just go do your own business. You get out on bad terms, bad standing, actually just get a bullet mark on your back, and an email will be forwarded to all the chapters in Europe, and information where your whereabouts will be also attached to the picture and everybody starts chasing you around. So getting out of the gangs on bad terms, it's quite stressful. So I was being forced to live in the same area where all the gang members were still at bad standing. And this is in that period of time. I've just backed up the car and I'm about to drive off when 3 young guys walk by. One of them is an immigrant with an attitude that I immediately recognized from the gangs. They all look like that's about 18 to 20 years old, and I assume that they're working in a nearby area where marijuana is being sold. One of them, the immigrant, the guy with the biggest attitude, the small alpha male in the small group, is looking at me, keeping eye contact, and then looks away and spits demonstratively on the ground in front of the car. My wife looks at me immediately, and I know. I then look at her, and I say to her, wow, just imagine if that had happened a year ago. My usual behavior would have been to stop the car, jump out, walk over to him, punch him in the face, and completely destroy his friends. However, I'm not doing that today. While they're passing by, I'm saying to my wife that I had to admit to her that I have a lot of conflictual thoughts right now, to which she replies, I'm not going to think less of you if you don't act on it. And it got to me a little, because I can't help him that by bringing that point up, that might be exactly what she was going to do. Think less of me. Why else would she think of it in the first place? But I choose not to do anything, and I do not feel the urge to it either, to be honest. Later, I'm meeting up with a guy named Morck. That's an old ex-biker gang member who has also left the same gang that I was in at the gym. We work out at the same place. I mentioned the situation to him, and he says, oh, then they got smashed. And I answer, no, they did not actually. And then he asked, well, what did you do? I didn't do anything, really. Oh, you didn't do anything at all? No, I sure as hell didn't. Well, they should have got their faces punched in. And during this whole time, his girlfriend is standing next to him, observing the conversation between Morgan and me. And before I was in a superior position to Morgan. I was being the president, he was being whatever, the lowest part. So I know very well what I should have expected and what should have happened in the past. So I tell him that if I wanted to do that, it wouldn't have been a problem, because that's how I handled the situations in my entire adult life, so I'm used to it. Only it would mean taking a path that would lead me somewhere else than where my goal is. But he doesn't seem to understand. And at that point, when I sense that I can make him understand, and I sense that he's wondering whether I've gone soft, I say to him, it might have got something to do with the fact that they are so young. Had it been someone at your age that had acted this way, I would have crushed his face and put away.
So when we do analysis of these logs, one of our concepts is expansive learning. And it is also inspired by critical psychology of Holzkamp, and I have further development. And it means expansive, that it's along something which is very meaningful and it's in line with one's life interest. For Martin, this new life interest, it was to become an academic. And in Holzkamp's term, expansive learning is the opposite as what he called defensive learning, which he defines as being cut off from the joint control over the living conditions, thrown back on oneself and controlled by immediate threats and needs. In some way, having no access or possibilities to act on anything because you are totally limited. So creating expansive learning is the same also in relation to create expansive agency. And the point within critical psychology is that you can do that as part of collectives. Doing it on your own is very difficult. So in this log, there was a lot of what you can say aspects of masculinity at stake. There was also something that you gave a name, Jack, of the former gang member, becoming present in the moment in some way, but even though it was a change. And this is related to how we understand the identity transformation. But there was also new feelings. So we studied both the continuity in the way of being, acting, thinking, feeling, but also the change. And the new feeling was a lack of urge to snatch them. So, you know, when we analyze this interpellation in relation to recognition, we also use Morck-Nissen's term, and we understand recognition as it established a special kind of suspense. Thus, recognition includes the power to define the other as a subject in a way where the very meaning only becomes evident later on behalf of this collective, which is also about to rise. So it's a process, a dialectical process where it's not there in the start, but after time it gets stronger and stronger, also becoming a subject and the expansive learning. Yes. And while doing this log, when you were in this situation, you actually said,
there's something in this we need to log in. It's going to be quite valuable for our research. And initially, when you hear about the logs, you might think that it's like insignificant. But if I could try to contextualize it a little bit, I was 13 years old when I started running with the gangs. And I was 16 when I became a part of it peripherally, and 18 when I was an integral part of it. So my whole sense of masculinity was produced in a hyper-masculine environment where all kinds of behavior and ways of coping and handling the situation was attached to a culture that was very conflictual and very offensive in all kinds of ways. So being presented with a situation as the one described in the log, I only know one way of handling up until now. That's being violent physically in order to maintain my position and authority in the environment. I can't let it slide that someone tries to challenge me publicly. But being able to create a log in which I create the empirical data necessary for me later on when I'm going to do the master thesis, it puts me on a trajectory in which I become more of an academic because I choose this way of living instead of reproducing the old behavior, which would be the physical confrontation with these guys. It also gave me a way out of it, because what happens then when you gear up to get in a fight, all kinds of stuff happens to your body, and it's very difficult when you choose intellectually not to participate in a fight to calm your body down. So what I found was that creating these logs not only put me into a trajectory which could help me produce this academic lifestyle that I wanted to be a part of, it could also be a way out for me, in which I could supplement or channel some of these frustrations to produce and get out of my system. So I would make these logs all the time.
And then when we were doing article, I would ask you to sit and type them out, so you would re-experience.
So I'll have to learn to transcribe. I'm sure everybody in here knows what that is. Man, that takes a lot of time. So that, something else happened actually, and that proved quite valuable to us in the later research. We all remember situations differently. When I was forced to listen to the logs I made myself, I was quite sure in the beginning that I knew what I was saying, but all kinds of stuff became apparent when I listened to myself describing the situation. Last time I was in the situation, I was in it neck deep, but now when I'm listening to it 3 months later, I have a distance to it emotionally in all kinds of ways, so I could hear all kinds of stuff in the logs that I couldn't remember being present when I made it. And that gave me a whole new way of looking from a meta perspective, looking at myself in the situation, and gave me the opportunity to start identifying various patterns and breaking them.
So when we were writing this article, actually this English article, which is coming out now, we have you have seen, I think, we have presented it twice at international conferences and so on. And we have, you know, taken small parts, slowly changed the analysis, discussed how do we understand the identity formation, what is the role of, you know, Jack as that the self, that you character and black box or boxed, and
in order to talk about it on a regular level and being able to get on without having to describe all kinds of stuff, I had to label stuff. So I would call the old president in me, I would call him Jack, and the academic I would call him Peter, whatever. But what I also encountered was that as in academia, like everybody hates dichotomies, but I had to use the label for this one in order to be able to talk about it, not losing all the nuances at all, just to be able to talk about it. So we will call Jack as a representative for the old biker I was, and Peter for the academic I wanted to become. And in such, it gave us the opportunity in the articles and describe it very clearly which person was in which trajectory during the way.
in the first article we made, you were actually the co-author Peter Hansen.
Yes.
Because at that time you could not be a co-author in your own name. And also when we did presentation, the name was Peter Hansen.
The first articles we wrote together had to be anonymized. No, what was it called? Pseudonym?
Yes.
Pseudonym. I had to write it on another name due to risks in the environments.
So, in this way we also analyze hope, desire, concerns in the conduct of everyday life, and Martin, his hope is to be able to avoid reproducing the old biker gang member self, and thereby becoming a person who acts reflexive and more neutral in situations that can be conflictual. So this becoming an academic, it is also about being reflexive in the situation. This is good luck, I will have to do this, and afterwards reflecting what is the meaning of this luck and giving it a name. You also, the best lucks, you wrote names, and this was splitting at the street, and this about the parentheses, it's also you were inspired by the moment movement.
Yes, it was the first time we used it, and I thought it would be quite clever, because he spits and I splits on the street. But a funny notion is actually, when you saw the log before, one of the themes in it is that I chose not to engage in a conflict with the guys, right? But ironically enough, when I get out of the zone and actually return to a safe zone with another guy from the gangs who also chose exit, and when I talk to him about it, I actually end up reproducing biker gang behavior, because I couldn't make him understand why I didn't want to be violent towards these guys. And in that situation, I ended up threatening him the way I didn't want to threaten the other guys. And that was very valuable to us, and to me myself, because it made very clear for me that I need to be very conscious about steering out of these situations.
So many of these situations, they have also been a kind of double-bind situation. And a double-bind situation we understand as a situation where no matter what you do, there are no good action possibilities. And if you don't do anything, you are also in deep trouble. So it's like Chessmate.
Checkmate. Or
Yeah. So how do you actually act in this situation? And following you these 4 or 5 years, there has been many double-bind situations, but by working and we will mention maybe the last one.
Yeah, when you're talking about double binds, something funny about that is when I started to work with Legan, the whole notion of how to do research was, of course, very new to me. I thought when you wrote an article, the only thing you had to do was sit at the computer and type in the words. Little did I know how much the empirical data meant. So I didn't know that when I was creating all of these logs, I made all the empirical data for a lot of articles afterwards. But when Legan taught me that, she also taught me that something that I could bring to the table was valuable. But something else, I can't explain this to other people, but I'm sure you would understand it in here. So when we try to use a theory to describe certain situations or whatever, and the theory comes in short, we've got to leave the theory and try to add something to it. So when we start describing dilemmas, we found that the word dilemma isn't enough to describe the situation, because in a dilemma you gotta choose between two difficult stuff, whatever, but you gotta choose. You don't have to, but you gotta, in a way. In a double bind, you're forced to act, and you can not act. But no matter what you choose, how do I put it?
Deep trouble.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
So we had to find the double bind term and integrate it in the theory. If we should talk about the death of Legan.
Yes, that was the last log you sent to me.
So the latest log I've been doing, and the latest double bind, is that back in Denmark, about 14 days ago or so, a young guy was killed at his book reception. I don't know how many of you have seen that. All right. So he was writing a book together with a journalist, and he was one of the guys who back in 2012 left the gangs, and he had been very visual and very open out in the media, doing all kinds of radio and talking about the gangs. And he wrote a book that was called Roots. And at this book reception, I was giving a speech for him because when he was in the gangs, I was his boss. So he was in a team that was in my chapter below him. So I couldn't recognize him for the good stuff you take back in the environment. That's not a practice you boast of, you don't tell people their good stuff. That's not the practice. So I wanted to recognize him now at the reception. I told him that very few people know how hard and difficult it is to leave the gangs. And I applauded him for that. So what happens is, we round up the book reception. We leave it. I go to the car with my girlfriend. He goes to the car himself, and he gets shot twice in the head and being killed at the reception. And that produces a new double bind, because no matter who did that, there's a very clear message from the environment that people shouldn't be this open as he is. And that presents me with a new double bind, because he's not only my friend, he's also a colleague. And we're in the same business, we're leading the gangs, trying to illuminate the mechanisms. So what am I supposed to do? Not talk about this anymore? Because it's integral for me to keep doing what I do, because I have this very deep passion, and it's very important for me to keep doing it. But also it's one of the main trajectories in which I keep reproducing the new me, keep reproducing the academic. Ethically, I think it's wrong to bow your head to that kind of threats. But also, if I act and speak up, I'm sending a message directly back to the environments. The message was close your mouth. And if I go on televisions and radio stations, and I keep opening my mouth, I'm putting the ball back in their court. So what's going to happen next? So I can't do either one, because one of them will put me in great risk. The other one would.
Yeah. Kill your academic self.
Yeah,
and your...
yeah, and what I also, not only the academic part in me, because it's not my job. I don't get paid for that. It's not only my job, It's something else. It's an integral part of me. And as a way for me to recontextualize whatever I've done in the environment, to try to make it into something positive so other people can learn from it. And we can, level all of it out, doing better stuff. So I either had to put the foot on the brake, so to say, or put the foot on the gas pedal. So I chose the gas pedal. So I appeared in the media, I appeared in the televisions the same day, and I spoke out about against them. I told that there was a message being sent. We should all ask ourselves what the message was and what the society should respond to such a message. And of course that had caused a little bit of trouble in the gangs.
So in that way, I also did a chronicle in Politiken, and I've been following 10 different former gang members, Nedim being one of them, you being one of them. And what I also wrote in that piece, it is that Nedim, he talked much more and in the public about the environment, where we have been very, all the others have been very more careful about, you have been talking a lot about the way which made you in there, drove you into the environment, and the exit processes. So there's also differences. Nedim, he became part of the journalist communities. It was very meaningful for him. It was the new community where he felt he belonged. Doing radio 24 hours together with a former policeman and this journalist who wrote the book and so on. It was his new community. The others have other communities where they have belonging. You have an academic research community and other, so there's also differences. And yeah, so, but what I noticed, because also I noticed that often you not just go and talk in the media, you also use aesthetical or people, they kind of respond to you on different things. And a couple of weeks before this episode, you had this man calling you, putting messages on your phone.
Yes. Up until now, it's easy for you to recognize that perhaps a lot of guys from the environment isn't fond of what I'm doing. But I'm still, because I've been in the game for so many years, I know all the rules, I know how to move along them, I know where the line is, and I know when I'm stepping on the line, as I'm doing now in the media. But it also makes it not easier, but still it makes it a possibility for me to navigate on these terms. But a few weeks ago, I got this phone call on my phone where this guy called me up, seeing me on the news and whatever it was about. The way you incarcerate people in isolation, I spoke out against that. And it made a lot of headlines because it called out the municipalities and the Connect for Song.
Provisions
and the correctional facilities and such. And he called me up and he started to call me all kinds of names, calls me a snitch because I've been in the exit program, calls me like a fag for being part of this, and told me that he'd been in real jails where he beat up people and all kinds of humiliating stuff. And I didn't do anything about it. I made a post where I just was being kind of political and slippery, and just put it on a positive spin. But what happened is that some guy, being like a media musician, whatever, he picked up the recording and he made it into like a music track where he sampled it, all the threads, and then he put music in the background. Yeah.
So it's also a way to this guy by doing it into a really kind of something you can dance at the discos and so on. It is a way of both spreading the, you can hear it sounds ridiculous what he's saying and so on. And by spreading in this way, it's also, when eating, he also used satire, you know, aesthetical forms to try to work around these things and also mirror out in the public, okay, calling a snitch for being part of the national exit program, it's ridiculous. It's not that, and so on. So in this way, I think it's about working creatively with other kind of mediating messages which can be one step in moving beyond these very difficult double-bind situations where people start, you know, doing things with it and where you are not alone and so on, but there's different people recontextualizing the meanings of it. And moving beyond the double-bind is not something you do in one day. It is a long process, and you can't steer it.
So one of the challenging things about receiving these kind of threats is that you got to do something about them. Because if you don't handle when people start sending threats, in a way you legitimize it. You create a practice that you keep doing it. And the mechanism in this is easy to recognize in the biker gangs, right? When people front you, you gotta handle it. Because if you don't, you lose face and everybody will start fronting you. So when I received that threat on the phone, I had to do something about it. Normally, of course, I would find out who it was and I would pay him a visit and I would express how I didn't like that kind of message. But that not being a part of my repertoire anymore, I had to do something else. Normally you can't just talk about people calling you a snitch because embedded in the accusation also is the possibility of you being it. So I couldn't share it in a normal way. And I didn't want to be the guy who called people out on a social media platform in a negative way. So I described it very positively and I wrote that it was very good that he took, his time to try to reach out and try to communicate his message. And he said something about he wanted to go to the media as well to get FaceTime and tell it. So I said I couldn't help him with that, but I would do my best. But the mechanism is the same. Because what happened is when the music track was made, he was being ridiculed. And that's another way to respond to a threat, isn't it? Something else was embedded in that message. I wanted to tell everybody in the environment if they started to do such a thing, I would handle it the same way. And that was me trying to prevent people doing that.
So now we want to open up for discussion.